What is up, guys? It is time for another early MLB Live Before Lock. Hopefully one that'll be slightly less cursed than the one we had yesterday, but we'll find out over the course of this hour. I am Chris Spags, joined once again by my co-host, my co-pilot for these early morning journeys. He's the nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
I actually like this slate a lot. I don't know how deep you've looked at some of these ownerships and whatnot, but it is weird. And we've got Austin Gomber pitching at Coors Field, projecting for nearly 50% ownership. There's some situations I like to take advantage of here.
Yeah, we definitely have some interesting numbers to talk about here, and honestly, a better slate of games in terms of the actual talent as well, and it seems like less weather issues. So hit that like button, guys. Let's get that power of positivity back in the air right now that we always need for any DFS sport, but especially these early morning MLB shows. And also make sure you are checking out some of our promos and deals going on at Awesemo.com/join. I believe we had a late breaking promo here because apparently we are a news gathering organization for our ad reads. A late breaking promo here. The promo code Live Before Lock will apparently get you 15% off of your first month of Awesemo Plus. I believe that was the screen that was on right before us and the word from our producer, Tyler, right before the show. So check that out if you want to get a special deal here just for the Live Before Lock people watching this show right now. Go to Awesemo.com/join to use that promo code MLB Live Before Lock as a promo code to get that 15% off. And also make sure to check out our friends over at PrizePicks because they're doing some great stuff for you and your money as well. Simplifying the world of daily fantasy sports where you can say goodbye to sharks, lineup optimizers, and mass multi-entry. All you have to do is pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players on the board to go over or under their projected score. If you correctly select the 5-player lineup, you can net yourself up to 10x your entry fee. So you're basically playing a nice return on a 5-way parlay of your normal fantasy picks from the NFL to NBA to esports and MLB. PrizePicks has it. You combine your picks across all the sports available. So another cross-sport parlay. So all the stuff you guys know from betting, you do it a version of that over at PrizePicks. Download the mobile app in the App Store or on Google Play today. Make your first deposit to receive an instant deposit match of up to $100 when you use the promo code Awesemo. Simplify daily fantasy with PrizePicks today and really take advantage of that $100 match bonus. That is one that is bigger than anybody else that you'll find out there. So go use them now and then play on PrizePicks, especially if you are one of those people who is tired of some of the ownership games that we talk about on some of these slates. But Greg, I feel like you already gave a brief overview, but give me one more brief overview of the slate. Anything that stands out in particular to you?
Well, one thing also I have to mention is that this is a wildly different slate on Fanduel versus Draftkings, similar to yesterday, because yesterday the Fanduel slate didn't exist when we did the show. It just got canceled right before we started. But today, what's different about it is that we have a Coors Field game with a lot of interesting ownership on DraftKings. It's not on the Fanduel slate. So everything is way different from a lineup construction standpoint for the sites for the early, because we have Fanduel 3-game slate, no Coors Field. Obviously, that matters a lot in DraftKings. 4-game slate. So not only do we have Coors Field with chalky offense, but one of the pitchers at Coors Field is really chalky also for DraftKings purposes.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the discrepancies, I guess, as much as we can throughout the course of the show. Certainly the ownership going to be different on FanDuel versus DraftKings is what Greg's talking about here. It does seem like there'll be more in the way of Atlanta and Washington stacks, and there will be some of the Colorado game that won't be available. So keep that in mind here as we get into the first game with Washington. 4.4 implied runs against Tucker Davidson. Davidson has not faced a lot of guys this year, but somehow on DraftKings will get over 20% ownership today. A very cheap price tag is probably a big part of it. He's been decent in terms of run prevention so far this year. He's only faced 23 batters, but a 3.7 xFIP, 21.7% K rate, and then the swinging strike rate and chase rate maybe give you a reason to believe that he could be a better strikeout guy than he was in his limited sample size so far. A 19.4% swing strike rate, 41.7% chase rate. And Greg, I don't know if you looked in any deeper into the Tucker Davidson logs of minor league games, but it does seem like based on his major sample size, a guy who keeps the ball down, who's not getting barreled very hard so far, who does miss bats fairly well. I get the ownership and the price tag and all of that, but it does seem like Tucker Davidson, certainly a spot you can go with or you can leverage against.
Yeah, so this is something we can talk about more as we go on. And this is also going to be, so FanDuel, it's easy enough. Just play Gerrit Cole at pitcher and you just move on and you try to differentiate elsewhere. But on DraftKings, it is a totally different situation because we have to roster 2 starting pitchers and it's all dicey after we get past Gerrit Cole. So I can tell you what I'm doing for today. I have Gerrit Cole's in about 90% of my lineups right now. And then it is just dart throws elsewhere. There's not one guy that I've hitched my wagon to. I just have a bunch of guys that I'm like 10 to 20% exposed to. And it's pretty much all the rest of the pitchers on the slate. So Tucker Davidson, for the price point, he's in my player, but he's only 4,900. And if a pitcher's that cheap, right, he's either going to get bombed and fail, or, you know, if he makes it through 5 or 6 okay innings, he's probably going to score, like 10 to 12 fantasy points. And for this slate, that's probably good enough. So I'm still fine with him. I'm right around the projected ownership we have. Tucker Davidson, his numbers for the year, not very impressive from a fantasy standpoint. Even if you look back at his minor league numbers, doesn't look like he's the most impressive fantasy pitcher. He's probably somewhere around replacement level. It's just a price point that's appealing.
Yeah, this looks like this season he struck out 32% of his guys in the minor leagues, but only 71 batters faced there, so not a big sample size either necessarily. But also going back to his entire minor league career, which does span an illustrious time period since 2016, close to a 23% K rate. And Alex has mentioned that recently for some of the minor league guys, and we saw it for Alek Manoah in his first start, maybe not so much that last one yesterday, but his first start, the strikeout rate for him really not far off his minor league numbers. I think that's something that has been sort of normalized a little bit more, but there's going to be a drop off, but it's not a huge one. But for this guy, that it looks like, at least based on the longer term numbers, maybe a league average strikeout guy, maybe a little bit below that. And I'm just surprised though, the swinging strike rate and chase rate does look pretty good. Maybe that he can improve a little bit here, but either way, I think what you're saying stands either. Like if he's good, great. If he's just a mediocre guy, replacement level guy, he's 4,900 and opens up everything else. So I think that's the logic you have to be okay with there. The Washington side, certainly decent enough against left-hand hitting on the year. 148 ISO, not the best, but they are getting on base at a 356 clip all year long against left-hand pitching. Strikeout rate 24%, a little bit beneath the league average of 24.1%. And Trey Turner, Juan Soto, Greg, going to be the highest owned guys today on DraftKings, as we talked about. Some decently owned bats as well on Fanduel. Josh Harrison, maybe a little bit less owned on DK. Zimmerman, a little bit less owned. Some ways you could stack up this team, and it does seem like the ownership pushing more towards a 2-man or 3-man stack here.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we look at the overall ownership, and we start with DraftKings, and we can talk about DraftKings and FanDuel individually, because, not that many games to talk about, and they're pretty different slates. So I think that's probably a good way to approach it. So starting with the DraftKings side, Washington, they look about appropriately owned if you look at the top stacks tool. However, like you said, all of the ownership is going to two guys. Trey Turner, 35.5% projected ownership. Juan Soto, 27.1% projected ownership. So on the whole, I don't really think 5-man stacks this team are going to be super popular. It's just two guys that really drive the ownership. So if you're going to have a national stack, even with Juan Soto and Trey Turner, you add in like Josh Harrison, you just mentioned, I'm overweight to the field on him. Starlin Castro, I'm overweight to the field on him. We have who is Jordy Mercer, 1% projected ownership towards the bottom of the lineup at nearly min price. You could make stacks of 5-mans that I think are going to be pretty contrarian. So overall, I'm fine with being a little bit overweight to the field on the team as a whole, and then oddly being a little bit underweight to the guys who seem like more pertinent pieces in Trey Turner and Juan Soto.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable way to approach it. Kind of like what we talk about a lot on the show, where you're just trying to keep the ownership to a reasonable levels and sort of bubble up the guys that are going to be maybe a little bit more productive than the rest of the field expecting with their median projection. And it does seem like a spot here where that would include guys like Josh Harrison, like Ryan Zimmerman, like Starlin Castro. And if you really want to get risky with it, Robles, Mercer, these guys are going to be basically entirely unknown. Alex Avila, the catcher, always going to be a little more stacked up with the team generally. He'll be just shy of 10%, but Robles and Mercer not owned at all. And certainly guys who can yield the benefit of the production that goes up top. A quick super chat here from our guy, I Hustle For It, saying my favorite two guys. Doesn't hurt that Spags comes on Overzet shows. Good news for you. Splash Play back tomorrow. So go check out the channel, subscribe and all that if you are on here as well. Just wanted to say thanks, guys. Been doing well during playoffs. So I want to show a little appreciation for the info you guys provide daily. Thank you, I Hustle For It. We very much appreciate that. Greg, staunch turnaround from yesterday where, boy, the chat was really, it's not all of it, but like one or two guys in the chat really coming for us with daggers, me in particular. And now I Hustle For It here, showing the love that we so richly deserve.
Yeah, one thing I did like about yesterday a little bit, though, is the one guy was like, hey, listen, I like Greg, but that's Spags guy. And then they're just speculating on your sexuality and other things. And it's like, well, at least he took the time to say he thought I was okay. But yeah, we're off to a better start today than yesterday. Yesterday really got off the rails.
The guys who love homophobic slurs while also talking about other men's appearances online, very much Greg Ehrenberg fans. That's where the sweet spot is for your audience. But yeah, we appreciate it a bunch here. And honestly, we always appreciate the regulars in chat. It's always like a small grouping of guys that are not always even, just sometimes a small grouping of guys. But just so you guys know out there, we very much appreciate you. It's the other guys that we don't appreciate. Next pitcher up, we got Patrick Corbin going against the Braves. Braves getting 5.2 implied runs against Corbin. And Corbin has had some signs of life in certain spots spots this year, but on the year, the numbers still look really bad. He's now faced 226 guys this year, 290 batting average allowed, 18% K rate, a 5% on run rate. He's not even getting that unlucky. A 320 BABIP is not that much higher than his 310 BABIP since 2019. And the soft contact too is also coming down a lot here, and 9.8% soft contact rate for him on the year. So he's getting hit fairly hard, or at least medium contact, Greg. And it does seem Corbin, I guess you can take a hope here that he gets going, but Atlanta really just rips it against left-hand pitching as well. A 212 ISO on the year. They strike out a little bit at 25.3% clip, but not enough here where I have any confidence level in Corbin. And I think the field's 15% seems like more than enough for me.
Yeah, I'm slightly underweight to the field on Patrick Corbin. It's hard to outright fade any of these crappy starting pitchers because, by the way, Patrick Corbin, it's not like he's that far removed from being a decent starting pitcher, but he's not that anymore. But beyond Gerrit Cole, I mean, you look at these other options. We got Jake Odorizzi. He's really expensive. And then Patrick Corbin, Austin Gomber, Mike Foltynewicz, Tucker Davidson, Martin Perez. I agree that Patrick Corbin isn't any good, and I think he's going a little bit over-owned. But you look at the other options, it's like, is Patrick Corbin that much worse than Austin Gomber at Coors Field, Mike Foltynewicz at Coors Field? We just talked about Tucker Davidson, who's thrown a total of 7 big league innings, Martin Perez. So it's slim pickings at pitcher. So that's why, like I said before, what I'm doing, I'm going very heavy on Gerrit Cole, and then just all these other guys I'm mixing in 10 to 20%. So Patrick Corbin in the player pool, but the preference is to stack against him as opposed to actually roster him because I am a little bit underweight to him.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the stance here, and I think that's generally how we've been approaching MLB pitching recently on some of these slates where there have not been a lot of great guys. Like yesterday, Sean Manaea was a guy I advocated for him. It's just like, I mean, it's Sean Manaea, but he's in the only good situation and the only guy who's actually getting strikeouts reasonably above league average, I guess, besides Walker Buehler, who still not as good as his price tag is. On these slates, I think you have to be kind of agnostic with some of these guys where I think Corbin's in bad on the year. I think it's a really bad spot for him going against a team who rakes against lefties, but I also think that you kind of just have to play some guys, and at 6,500 Corbin's going to work in some construction. So can't run away from it. A good way to leverage if you are getting a good amount of Braves as well, or just a hedge a little bit there. But does seem like Corbin's better days so far, really trending behind him. On the other side, though, we're going to have Ronald Acuna picking up a ton of ownership. We'll also have Freddie Freeman, Ozzie Albies decently owned. The rest of the stack, though, does start to decrease a little bit in ownership, where Austin Riley, not too highly owned despite a 311 ISO since 2019 against left-hand pitching. You also have William Contreras, who also hits lefties pretty well, 353 ISO for him. It's much smaller sample size, but a 60% hard contact rate in his at-bats so far, so things could be good for him. But if you like this Brave stack, Greg, lots of ways you can go with it. Ownership product not that high, even if you include Acuna. And Acuna coming off a bad day yesterday. I picked him for a home run yesterday, and he had probably his worst day of the whole season. So it feels good to go back here today. But having that bad day yesterday probably doesn't hurt his odds too bad of getting back on track today.
No, I mean, it doesn't help him either. It's just, hey, that's what happened yesterday. Today gets to face a fairly bad starting pitcher.
Positive regression, Greg. I think that's
there we go. Because that's how good baseball. Whatever happened yesterday, we'll use that to predict today's results. But Acuna, super popular today. He is projected for over 40% ownership on Draftkings. On Fanduel, Acuna currently projected for, let's see, I'm sure this is going to be also 40%. I was actually expecting this to be a really massive number considering it's one less game. But yeah, 40% for him on both sites. Once again, fine play, pay up for. I don't have Acuna in 40% of my lineups, but to me, he is the top pay up option on the slate. It's just always going to be hard for me to be overweight to any one individual hitter when they're in like half the field's lineups.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. And to me, like Acuna, maybe closer to a 25% or 30% cap. And even then, you could probably come in a little bit lower just in case the ownership. It's weird because I think sometimes the ownership does play a little conservatively where we see some of these guys get like closer to 50%. And sometimes they're at 20%, and I don't really know where to fall in there. But I do feel like if you had them in a quarter of lineups, even if the field got to 20%, like I wouldn't be killing myself for having Acuna 5% more than the field.
No. And let's see, where am I at right now? I'm in the 30s right now. So okay. still underweight. I think one of the other issues too that I have is, so I have Acuna and also our Awesemo projection. Acuna is projected so much higher than say like Juan Soto, and there aren't that many pay up options at outfield that I think are reasonable choice. Like oddly, Chris Owings he's on the injured list, but he's the most expensive player on the slate at 6,000. But beyond that, we've got Garrett Hampson is 5,900. That's egregiously high. They've got Aaron Judge at 5,800. Which actually I think it makes sense to come a little bit overweight to the fields on him. But then it's Acuna 57. I think that he's still a much better play than a Rosarena from a projection standpoint. Same goes for guys like Austin Meadows priced over 5,000, Juan Soto over 5,000. So if we're looking at one of the popular pay up options, I would rather get to Acuna than Juan Soto.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as you, and certainly room to get to both guys on a slate like this one where there aren't that many pay-up options to get to. But to me, I would go a little bit more in favor of Cunha as well, and because Davidson to me just a unknown quantity that maybe could be a little better than it seems as well. Let's keep going through here. We got a few more games to hit on. Hit that like button if you can, guys. We appreciate that a bunch, and also make sure to use that promo code MLB Live Before Lock if you want to save on 15% on your first week of Awesemo Plus. I might have said first month earlier. It's first week, so there you go. That's a little bit less of a discount, but still a pretty good one to get in on. So go to awesemo.com/join. Check out that promo code MLB Live Before Lock for 15% off your first week. So even cheaper outlay for you guys in terms of cash if you want to check it out. And it's just a deal specific just to this show. So make sure to check it out and use it and all that fun stuff. We got next game up. Tampa Bay 3.1 implied runs going against Gerrit Cole. Greg already talked about him a little bit, but clearly the best pitcher on the slate by a wide margin. 37% K rate for him on the year. Started to trickle down a little bit recently with some of his recent performances, but still on the year. Going to be the best pitcher by a pretty good margin. 0.83 whip, not walking guys at too high of a rate, a 3.4% walk rate. In this spot against Tampa Bay, 26% K rate on the year against right-hand pitching. Does seem like overall Gerrit Cole in the best situation, Greg, and he will be owned appropriately for it with 80% expected ownership on Draftkings. A very high mark as well on Fanduel at 58%. So relative to these slates, Greg, Gerrit Cole will be treated like a play that is going to be as sure of a thing as we can find. And I think it's hard to debate that, but what's the number for you that you can get to with Gerrit Cole?
So I have him in slightly over 90% of my lineups now, and it's twofold. Number one, I'm high on Gerrit Cole basically every time he pitches. He's been outstanding this year. If you look at his box scores, yeah, sure, he had 17 fantasy points his last time out, but in general, that's like a floor for him. He's had one game where he scored 9 fantasy points, one game where he scored 16, one where he scored 17, which, by the way, 17 fantasy points from him on this slate, that might be enough to be optimal given how weak the other options are. But every other start this year, he's had 26 or more DraftKings points. So keeping that in mind and the other options on the slate, if you're playing on FanDuel single pitcher site, I think you could just lock in Gerrit Cole. I have no issue with that. And then DraftKings, I have him in almost all of my lineups. I have a couple of hedge raise lineups, but it's not anything I would recommend unless you're playing 150 lineups. But Gerrit Cole, pretty clearly the top overall option on the slate, not just because he's good himself, but because the other players at his position are really lacking.
If you're not playing Gerrit Cole, what are you doing with that money? Because I guess what does the lineup construction look like to you where maybe there's some way that it could pay off without Cole? Because I would think it includes paying up for all the bats and then at pitcher. I mean, I guess a pitcher, that's really going to be the big issue. Maybe you go to Odorizzi and Gomber is the other pick.
Just play Gerrit Cole.
Go to Odorizzi and Davidson, and then you can afford Chris Owings.
It's just play Gerrit Cole. I mean, there's no way around it. I think there's a chance, let's say the Rays go out and score 6 runs. Gerrit Cole still might be optimal because he might get enough strikeouts to where who's outscoring him? If I was to, which 2 pitchers do you think are most likely to outscore Gerrit Cole today?
I think for me, I would say Odorizzi in a good strikeout matchup. He's been a 26% K rate guy. So looks pretty good to me. And not that he in outscoring, I think still going to be a tough prospect, but I think he can get into range potentially. And then I guess you'd say Gomber, who's keeping the ball down, and you hope that, but I mean, it's going to leave a lot of salary left for the hitters.
So the most fantasy points Odorizzi has scored all season is 15.6. Okay. Austin Gomber has had a little bit of a ceiling. He had a game where he had 31 fantasy points against the Mets. Beyond that, though, he's capped out at 23 fantasy points, and Gerrit Cole averages over 23. So it's really hard for me to see Gerrit Cole not landing an optimal lineup. I know he's going to be really popular, but I just kind of view him as a free square on the slate.
Yeah, I guess Odorizzi too, only pitching 65 pitches per appearance so far this year too, so that's not a great mark for him. Yeah, honestly, all right. I guess you've made your case here. Tucker Davidson, what if he's a world beater? That could be the one. Yeah,
the guy who's thrown 7 innings for his career, and was okay in the minor leagues.
Could you imagine if it's a short slate with Gerrit Cole and Tucker Davidson and Austin Gomber end up being the winning lineup?
That would be something. I mean, listen, I'm Gerrit Cole. We have projected for 83% ownership, and I'm overweight to him. I don't see a way around it.
Yeah, I'm think that's a reasonable take. I would still be inclined to just be with the field at 80% if you could. Again, I don't know what these lineups are going to look like without him, but get weird with it for some percentage. I guess your 10% of lineups too. Getting weird with that is fine, especially if you are putting in more lineups. But there's still a pathway here for Cole to not get there, and I think that's something with the top pitchers tool. Maybe I'm just a little more sensitive to, where like we've had these guys on some slates, and we don't have the top pitchers tool for the short slate right now. It's only for the main slates and all that, but it does seem like with a guy like Cole, like I just see him at 50% so often to be the top pitcher on a slate, even on DraftKings where you get two, that it spooks me off into going that heavy. But I know some people have had some success recently, like playing like Robbie Ray 100%. So I don't know, maybe it's something in MLB that you got to be a little more open-minded to on these crappy pitching slates. The hitters though, against Gerrit Cole, are you willing to get there at all, given the fact that he is going to be the highest owned pitcher by a wide margin? And he has had some days recently where he's given up production to teams that you wouldn't expect, probably not full stack production in a meaningful enough way, but I wouldn't hate the idea of one-offing or even mini stacking some of these guys. A 5-man stack seems unlikely to get there with a really good Yankee bullpen behind Cole as well. But any interest at all in you for Tampa Bay hitters? Would you get there even a little bit?
So out of 150 lineups, I have 2 5-man raised stacks, and I'm looking at them right now. And first of all, they're terrible lineups. It's just solely for hedge purposes. And then the other thing also, they leave so much salary on the table because of the other pitching options on the slate. So the lineups I have, like it's leaving $4,000 in salary on the table, and it's projected so far below what I have as an optimal lineup for this slate. I mean, it's baseball, so it's not like it's basketball where the projections matter that much, but I mean, it's really hard for you to meaningfully get to any raised stacks. And if I was playing 100 lineups, I'd probably have 0. And even with 150, like I said, it's only a couple of them. And that's just how I overall end up sorting my lineups. But yeah, there's no significant interest here.
Yeah, I feel like the one-offs to me may be a little more appealing, where Brandon Lau hit from the left side of the plate. I feel like not a bad price tag. Austin Meadows had a steep price tag, but he has had pretty good pop. And Cole does give up a little more historically to lefties of the 192 ISO allowed to that side of the plate. So that to me would sort of be the guys I think are the most appealing. But generally, Zunino too as a one-off, I think never a bad thing either. There's some ways to chop it up here a little bit. I guess this ties into a question that we have in the chat right now from Mike Campbell, asking one that we've talked about a good amount, and I think you just answered in the chat anyway. But on this short of a slate, would you make a rule for your optimizer to allow one batter to face your pitcher? I think that's something we've talked about being fine here. I would watch out to make sure it's not happening in every single lineup to make sure of that. But I feel like if you're getting that in some amount of lineups, I would have no issue at all.
Yeah, and I think this is actually more important for Fanduel today than DraftKings because it's only a 3-game slate. And I think the most sensible way to get to raise hitters on Fanduel is you have one of them in a lineup with Gerrit Cole, and you hope like, hey, maybe Gerrit Cole pitches 7 innings, gives up 1 run. And that 1 run, maybe it's, a solo homer or something like that. And you just have a lineup that's way different than the field. That's where I have the most interest in Tampa Bay Rays. It's not really a full stack, but just as a one-man, one-off, maybe say like Austin Meadows as one individual hitter to roster against Gerrit Cole in a lineup with Cole.
Also, we got a chat here from Pecan saying, I know no one cares, but I ripped out a fumble on Odorizzi in high school. I think that's another reason to knock down his projection. Personally, I feel like if somebody in our YouTube chat could do anything adversarial athletically to one of these athletes on the slate, I feel like, Greg, you got to immediately knock him down 10%.
Yeah, I mean, let's see, 10%. So we would actually, as is though, I think Odorizzi's pretty overowned on DraftKings, and that was even before I knew this information. So yeah, let's go. I'm gonna bump him down 1/10 of a point just for this and rerun my lineup. So it'll end up with him coming in like one less lineup.
Yeah, I hope it does have a meaningful effect here. Now that we have that information, really appreciate the inside intel from Pecan. A fun name as well. I feel like we've seen that name before, and it always tickles me. It feels like something out of a children's book in a way that I appreciate. Ryan Yarbrough on the other side of this game going against the Yankees, 4.4 implied runs for the Yankees. Yarbrough on the year has been a mediocre strikeout guy, which has been the same for him since 2019. He's had a 20% K rate since 2019, down to a 19.5% K rate this year. Struggling a little bit with his exit velocity as well. The max exit velocity for him are really high, a 117.4 marker, which is the highest on the slate. But he is avoiding barrels overall. So sometimes he's getting hit really hard. In general, he's not 5% barreled ball rate. But Yarbrough, a usable pitcher, I guess, relative to what this slate is, Greg. He's going to be 7% owned. He's thrown about 81 pitches per appearance, not really taking the longest time per at bat, 3.7 pitches per batter face. So Yarbrough, I feel like on a slate where there really isn't a lot of good guys and nobody who makes sense in a big way as an SP2, I think to me, 7.4% ownership feels a little bit low, even though the Yankees, we know, very capable of bringing that power back at any given time.
So I have him at 12% right now, which is a little bit overweight to the field. The real concern here I have with Yarbrough is how deep he works into games. Like you said, he doesn't average the most pitches, but he did have one start where he randomly threw 103 pitches. That was, let's see, how long ago is that now? That was about a month ago. So with that in mind, there has been a time he's done it, except that also just looks like an outlier that I think overall brings up his average pitch count. Because if you look at his recent starts, he's gone 78 pitches, 86 pitches, 84 pitches, 56 pitches, and 65 pitches. So the most likely scenario here to me is we probably get somewhere around 4 innings out of Ryan Yarbrough. There's no way that the Rays are going to let him go through the order more than twice against the Yankees. And then the Rays go into their decent bullpen. And the other issue that I have with Yarbrough in this spot is I don't think he's very likely to get a win going up against Gerrit Cole, especially because I don't think he's going to pitch 5 innings. That already disqualifies him. But beyond that, I don't think it's a game the Rays are very likely to win. So I think that Ryan Yarbrough is pretty capped in terms of upside. The way that he ends up optimal on the slate is not because he goes out and scores 20 fantasy points. The way he ends up optimal is if he scores 13 fantasy points and every other one of these cheap starting pitchers suck, which is in the cards. So I have him slightly overweight to the field, but still other cheap guys I slightly prefer.
Yeah, I think like the way his pathway is if Martin Perez is really bad and then people are owning him at actually a higher clip. We only have Martin Perez at 1% ownership. So that price tag overall might not be that highest, that highly owned. And Corbin, we mentioned, will be 15%. Some of the cheaper guys will be higher owned. So I don't know. It's an interesting lineup construction, I think, question for people out there where this $7,300 SP2 option doesn't seem like it's going to be the highest owned in that range. So maybe that's alone is a logic of going to Yarbrough, is that people just won't be on a construction that gets you right to that point. So I don't know. That's not a great argument for him as a pitcher by any stretch, but still for a line construction for DFS, I get why the ownership would be there. A little bit more than 7.5% we have projected today on DK. Also worth pointing out, this game is 94% humidity rate today. So something to keep in mind here, the ball could fly a little bit more. So even adds a little more credence, I think, to the one-offs potentially going against Gerrit Cole, even if you're playing him. The Yankees hitters too should benefit. Aaron Judge, you mentioned earlier, only projected for 9% ownership, or actually less than that, closer to 8% ownership. And it does seem like going against Yarbrough, he has been a beast against left-hand pitching for a while. Is Aaron Judge a 315 ISO allowed? Low ownership for him, low ownership for Gio Urshela, low ownership for DJ LeMahieu, never a guy I'm dying to get to, but still under 15%, not that bad. Does seem like the Yankees, Greg, under-owned in a spot where the weather getting to this kind of level in New York where it is humid. It's not the hottest day at 65 degrees, but the ball's going to fly a little bit more. And Yarbrough, not a guy who gives up a ton of power, but it's going to be a tough situation. It's a pretty big park downgrade to go to the Yankee Stadium with the weather heating up.
Yeah, so here's something that's really nice about the Yankees. There's no ownership going here relative to what we'd expect from the Yankees on a short slate. So the Yankees, 7.7% projected ownership as a team, 16.8% chance of being the top value on the slate. So we have them with the second best odds of being the best value stack. And so we could get to the Yankee stack, 5-man stack, Gerrit Cole pretty easily. And then you just kind of mix in whatever 3 plugs you want. So to me, I think the Yankees are a pretty high priority stack on Draftkings. On Fanduel, they're a little more appropriately owned. We have them with a 16% ownership share, still 21% chance to be a top value, 15% chance to be a top stack. For Fanduel in particular, I am looking at the top value much more than I'm looking at the overall odds of being the top stack, just because I think it's such a high priority to jam Gerrit Cole in on Fanduel on a single pitcher site. And we kind of need the value to make that happen. So for Fanduel, I'm really looking at the top value, and I think the Yankees priority play on Fanduel. And then same goes for DraftKings, where they just look like they're going really under-owned, and the Yankees are cheaper than we normally would expect. I don't really understand why nobody's getting to Aaron Judge here.
Yeah, I would agree. In the bottom of the order too, like I know we've talked about Rougned Odor a lot earlier in the season when he was inexplicable chalk most days, but he does hit lefties pretty well. 235 ISO, 5% on run rate against lefties too. So I think that's something that I don't mind going to him at a relatively cheap price tag. Higashioka as well at catcher, 278 ISO, 6.9% on run rate. A nice number, as we all know, going against Yarbrough as well, going against lefties. Like, I think it's a nice spot for this stack overall. And for a 5-man stack, it looks entirely unknown. You could also take some of the one-offs or mini stacks, and Judge will still be unknown. Like, it's an interesting spot because I do think really everybody in this lineup, I guess besides Miguel Andujar, I think you can make a case to play all these guys. And yeah, I'm shocked the field's not going to be here. I kind of wonder if the ownership will be a little bit higher by the time it gets a lock.
By the way, we did just get an ownership update, and it has gone up a little bit, not significantly though. We still have them with 8.9% ownership, actually right in line with the odds of being a top stack, except still relative to the value odds, where we have them with one of the best chances on the slate to be a top value stack, still third best on the slate now behind Houston and Texas. I think the Yankees are a team to stack up for sure.
All right, we're at the halfway point of the show. We got 2 games left, so let's do a quick run of money time here. I'll flip the hat, and we'll do the top 5 owned plays for free on DraftKings and Fanduel. And today, actually, all the main slate ownership projections will be free for you guys, so feel free to check those out later on today. But these are gratis from your old pals, Spags and Greg. And Greg, I'm including you here. It's like when I sent flowers to my mom from me and my girlfriend. Like, she had nothing to do with it, but I just got to make sure you get the credit too. That's where we are. Yes, I am comparing you to my girlfriend. How does that make you feel, Greg?
Loved. I feel good. I'm flattered, and I didn't realize you thought I was so pretty.
Vaguely aroused, I think. Yeah. Number 1 owned projected play on DraftKings today, according to the Awesemo ownership projections that you can always get for yourself at awesemo.com/join. The aforementioned Gerrit Cole, 83% ownership is the tag expected now. Trey Turner, number 2 at 40%. Ronald Acuna, number 3 at 38%. Austin Gomber, the man we will talk about in a little bit here, 36% projected ownership. And Matt Adams, formerly, I remember, I think it was EMAC that called him Fat Adams, or might have been the chat who called him Fat Adams. Somebody called him Fat Adams. It doesn't feel like an EMAC thing. 32% ownership for Matt Adams. Are you surprised by any of these numbers? Matt Adams, I think, being that highly owned, it's a nice price tag for him, but it's a lot of Matt Adams out there.
Yeah, so I think the reason we're seeing so much ownership going to Matt Adams is it's just the price point in Coors Field. So I'm running another set of lineups right now, which is the most recent ownership updates that we got. And I am going to be underweight to the field of Matt Adams just because that's a lot of ownership going to him. But I understand it just because it's a Coors Field game. What his price point is at.
And on FanDuel, the top 5 will be Gerrit Cole, number 1 at 59%. Number 2, Trey Turner again at 44%. Number 3, Ronald Acuna at 42%. Number 4, Ryan Zimmerman at 37%. And number 5, Yordan Alvarez at 34%. So nothing that crazy here. Ryan Zimmerman, I feel like maybe one that stands out comparably to his former teammate, Fat Matt Adams. But I feel like 37% ownership for Zimmerman, a little bit lofty, but the price tag works. I don't know. None of these numbers on FanDuel to me are that crazy.
No, I think it all makes sense. Also, I mean, it's a 3-game slate, right? So there is a pretty big difference when you go from 4 games to 3 games. We're also removing a Coors Field game. That makes, I mean, there's only so many hitters to pay up for and so many guys to make sense. So it all seems sensible to me.
Larry C., one of our regulars in chat saying Greg is Spag's work girlfriend, LOL. Like, the options are pretty limited here. It's like you or Eric or EMAC. Like, what do I choose? It's a tough time in the Awesemo prisons.
Yeah, I mean, what one of the behind the scenes people? It's like, hey, I really like Joey Corbin. You know, like, and people don't even know who that is.
I feel like your work girlfriend would be Jordan Klein.
Oh, probably, yeah, because number 1, he gets upset. Like if I say I like something that other producers do, he texts me. If I don't text him for a long time, he gets upset. It's a lot of drama.
He's showing off his gun sometimes on camera. It just happens to be strange coincidences occurring here.
Yeah, he gets upset with us. He turns the camera off in the middle of shows, and like, yeah, who knows what he's doing when that goes on. That's a little sketchy, but yeah, I think that's probably apt.
Yeah, look, we all have to have somebody here. Honestly, I think this is an amusing bit. Feel free to ask all the other hosts of the channel who their work girlfriend is, and we'll find and see how they handle it as well. They handle it with a great level of class that Greg and I both did. Next game up, we got Boston, 4.1 implied runs against Jake Odorizzi, who on the year has not pitched very deep into games. He only faced 57 batters, so I guess still sort of getting into form here. So maybe that pitch count comes up a little bit, but only 65 pitches per appearance so far this year, 3 innings per appearance, not great numbers. Has it a 26.3% strikeout rate. That's right in line with his historical numbers, 26.5% K rate for Odorizzi since 2019. And this spot against Boston, 25.7% K rate for them, which is above average against right-hand pitching on the year. I could see taking stabs at Odorizzi. I do feel like the 30% ownership for him relative to his salary and the projection just feels like a bit much, but still, I feel like on a short slate, Greg, I might be a little more willing to buy in here. To me, feels like another guy to get a 15% or so. But how are you feeling about Odorizzi at this point, who's, again, just does have some limitations with how we've seen from him so far?
Yeah, so I am pretty low on him right now. Number 1, I don't think that he's a particularly great play, but he's also really popular. So we have him now picking up 30% ownership. And I get the pitching options are thin. We have seen the ownership come down a little bit on Austin Gomber. The ownership's come down on Tucker Davidson since before when he was uber chalk. But 30% Odorizzi, number 1 in a really difficult matchup against the Boston Red Sox. Odorizzi also not a guy who generates a ton of swing and misses. He's been limited on a pitch count this year. There's a lot of red flags for a guy that's this popular. So once again, I said I have most of these SP2 options are in the neighborhood of 10 to 20% owned for me. that's where I'm at. I have Odorizzi in 13% of my lineups. That's way less than what the field has. And I feel pretty comfortable with that. I don't think Odorizzi 8,100 relative to his ownership is a very strong play today.
Yeah, I could see it. I think he does fit my agnostic belief on pitching today, where I think there is enough strikeout ability. He is an above average strikeout pitcher, but questions about the pitch count. He's also been giving up a really generous launch angle and a very limited sample size so far this year with a 21.6 degree launch angle, which would be the worst mark on the slate. And a team like Boston does have a lot of power hitters with those big power swings. Certainly could take advantage of it, but hopefully he does level out a little bit more. And I still think he's worth getting some, but 30%, I would agree with Greg. A little bit of a lofty number. The Boston stack still, to me, I think very appealing going against Odorizzi because of the volatility that he brings to the table. And Boston on the year does have a 192 ISO against right-hand pitching overall. 312 on base percentage, not the most impressive, but still a team that across the board, lots of quality hitters. And the ownership, Greg, not that crazy, where we'll have two guys in the top 5 here with Hernandez and JD Martinez under 10% ownership on DraftKings. And overall, I feel like in the stack situation, it's a roof closed game, so that is not a great hitting park overall. Besides that, though, I feel like Boston, fairly appealing stack. And to me, maybe far enough behind the Yankees, but still it's just under-owned in the same way the Yankees were.
Yeah, I think the Red Sox are a team worth getting to, number one, based on the low ownership, and then number two, the high ownership on Odorizzi. I think there's some good leverage there because it looks like there's a chance that Odorizzi is going to end up being the second most popular pitching option on the slate. The one concern I have here as of now, and this isn't even a real concern, but I don't know who's going to be in the order for the Red Sox. We very frequently see teams give players rest during day games, and we don't have a Boston lineup yet. There are two teams we don't have lineups for yet. It is the Boston Red Sox and the Texas Rangers. So from Boston, it looks like on both Fanduel and DraftKings, it's a team that's fairly low owned and I think is a pretty high priority stack. I'm just not exactly sure which guys are going to be the highest priorities for me because we don't have that lineup. It looks like Alex Verdugo on both sites, too cheap, also not that much ownership. He would make a lot of sense. And JD Martinez, he's struggled a little bit lately, but in terms of a pay up option as a pivot off of guys like Ronald Acuna, Juan Soto are picking up a whole bunch of ownership. I don't think that Juan Soto or Ronald Acuna are 8x more likely to be in the optimal lineup than JD Martinez today. So with that in mind, relative to his ownership, I like being overweight to Martinez.
Yeah, and I think Bogart's endeavors too, not being that highly owned, and never mind getting those guys when they are not chalk plays either. And Odorizzi too doesn't have any noteworthy lefty-righty splits, so I think you can play into these guys and have the same level of confidence that they can probably get to Odorizzi or not. But I think the Boston stack, overall, just a team that's under-owned, and I agree with your take about Martinez too. Certainly has as high of a ceiling as anybody on the slate, even though you get a little better results with him against left-hand pitching. Still one of the quality hitters here, and he's under 5K, which has not been the case very often recently. On the other side, we have Martin Perez, lefty going against Houston here, 4.9 implied runs for Houston. And Houston on the year strikes out this strikeout rate for them is just dropping more and more by the game, but a 17% strikeout rate on the year against left-hand pitching. So Martin Perez, a guy who's already under league average in terms of his strikeouts, the 22.1% K rate. It's actually improved from his longer-term sample size since 2019, an 18.8% K rate for Martin Perez. I don't like Martin Perez in the spot very much. I still think because he's going to be 1% owned, you can maybe get to 10% here and just hope that he does spike something or just ends up usable in that price tag, like who we talked about previously with with Brian Yarbrough. I think to me in this spot, Perez, like that's the only reason to play him is that maybe he's just unowned enough and nobody's going to the price tag that it opens up something different with your lineups. But Perez himself, Greg, I feel like as a play, not much noteworthy to talk about besides the fact that he keeps the ball down fairly well and does a decent job of limiting production. Yeah,
and I kind of think for this slate though, Martin Perez kind of checks a lot of boxes for me. So I mean, I'm decently overweight to the field on him, but I mean that's also relative to him being 1% owned right now. But look at Martin Perez's recent games. This is going back to the end of April. 21 fantasy points, 16, 14, 23, 21, 16. Any of those scores, I think, is fairly likely to land him in an optimal lineup today. And the last time he had a bad outing was April 23rd. Like he's been on a decent run for a while here. Like you said, not a lot of strikeouts, generating a lot of ground balls. But, you get out of him 5 or 6 innings with 3 runs or something like that, and he strikes out, 3 or 4 hitters. If that's enough to get him 15 fantasy points, I don't mind that for this slate. I think that's worth taking a chance on. Certainly at 1% ownership, I have him right around 11 right now. Or that's what I did on my last run that I'm now updating because I realized that I was missing some of the Rockies players. But I think that Martin Perez, I definitely want to be more than 1% on him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I said 10%, so I feel like we're on the same page with that. I think it's just a spot where like you don't have to be the most impressed with Martin Perez. And I do think the fact that he hasn't had terrible games for a while now maybe gives you a little more hope or a little more faith in it, where maybe you can get to 15% and just swap his ownership with an Odorizzi or something, and or some portion of the ownership with an Odorizzi. But I do think Perez, he's just usable because he's a player on the slate who's going to go unowned, and I do think there's a possibility here that if you're just playing lower probability outcomes than the rest of the field, but like Perez projects in line with these guys, and you're going to get different bats and you're going to get different construction overall. So that's sort of the main logic here, that maybe you can find that sliver of unknown terrain where if you go Perez and like a Yankee stack or something, you're going to be with less of the field than you would be normally. Houston side, though, I feel like the Houston bats look overowned given what we just talked about with Perez, where he's really good at run prevention. It's not a bad bullpen behind him. Actually, a really high strikeout rate for the Boston bullpen, a 27% K rate so far this year. Not that matters that much for Houston because they don't strike out anyway, but I do feel like, Bregman, Alvarez, Diaz, Altuve, like I have no issue with those guys, especially Altuve, Alvarez, and Bregman on most slates, and Bregman especially against lefties. But going against Perez, like if he's going to keep the ball down, I don't mind just getting more Perez and getting a little bit less of Houston, where as a stack, they just seem kind of, to me, especially the top guys, significantly overowned.
Yeah, I mean, Yordan Alvarez is always somebody who's viable as a one-off to me, especially at this price point. He's only 4,000 on DraftKings. That is a really cheap price for somebody with the power upside of Yordan Alvarez. So he's the priority play on Houston for me. Beyond that, though, Bregman 30% owned. That's a little much for me. Altuve 18%. Whatever, I'm a little under that, but I think that's about fair. And then the end of the lineup, guys, we've got our guy, Chas McCormick in there, but he's not picking up any ownership. Taylor Jones, no ownership. Miles Straw, no ownership. Garrett Stubbs, no ownership. So I think if you want to make a 5-man stack of the Astros and include one or two of these guys at the end of the lineup for salary savings, you have a very unique lineup from the field because McCormick, 2% projected ownership. Taylor Jones, 2% projected ownership. Miles Straw, 1% projected ownership. He's my favorite of the cheap guys here. And then Garrett Stubbs, only 6% projected ownership. So I think individually, these guys are okay value plays to mix and match with the more popular guys. But as one-offs, Yordan Alvarez, that's the priority.
Garrett Stubbs, I would say, too, being a catcher, 2,100, and he's hit fairly well against fellow lefties so far in his career. Not a big sample size, only 10 at-bats, but he has had pretty good pop and pretty good contact as well. I wouldn't mind going there just because he's a cheap catcher, and a stack catcher is not a bad thing. And yeah, to be clear, like I don't mind the Houston stack. I just feel like, to me, Bregman looks a little bit overowned. I don't mind getting less of him and spreading the ownership around a little bit more like you were talking about. But it's a little bit of Perez, a little bit of Houston. I think embracing the volatility of the spot, to me, seems like a good move overall. Last game on the slate, and it is a big one. And Alan S. asking Astros low strikeouts. Yes, on the year, they have a 17.3% strikeout rate against left-hand pitching, which is under the league average of the year of 24.1%. And actually, the projected lineup they have today, I have being a little bit lower too, with a 16.2% aggregate K rate. So not a lot of strikeouts to be found for their matchup. Last game here, though, Greg, Texas 4.9 implied runs against Austin Gomber. And I know you've been dying to talk about this man with this 25% K rate on the year, giving him just a 211 batting average, is keeping the launch angle fairly low, getting barreled at a 9% rate, which may be a little bit higher than you'd like to see in Coors. But for the most part, Gomber has limited runs overall, good run prevention skills, not giving up a lot of hits overall, and also just getting strikeouts above average. So, Greg, I get the ownership for him. I feel like 35%, rare situation where I think maybe you can justify going to Austin Gomber, even in the adverse conditions of playing at Coors.
Yeah, so I felt really good about the Rangers stack when we first started because Gomber was projected for nearly 50% ownership. That was what I opened with. He asked me what my overarching thoughts on the slate. And I'm going, well, we have a mediocre pitcher at Coors Field projecting for 50% ownership. That just screams leverage. That's come down in a really big way. I still think there's leverage in stacking against them, although the Rangers are also kind of popular. It's a weird spot where Gomber's really popular, as is the other side of the game. But Gomber still 35% projected ownership, so it's come down a little bit. But I like getting underweight to the field on Gomber, and I'm going to get some leverage by stacking the Rangers against him. In terms of SP2s, like I said, I'm just flat on these guys. So any of the ones that are really popular, whether it be Jake Odorizzi, Austin Gomber, I'm underweight to the field on. The guys that are less popular, Martin Perez, Michael Foltynewicz, who we're going to talk about in a second, I'm overweight to the field on. Foltynewicz, I actually think, is one of the better pivot plays on the slate.
Oh boy. Okay. So I would be more inclined to get the higher ownership on Gomber than to go to Fultonevich. And I get that this is a really bad Colorado lineup. This is going to be their confirmed lineup as well. So we're jumping around a little bit here, but because it's this game, I think we have to kind of do that a little bit more here. I still would go Gomber over Fultonevich. And the matchup, I guess you do have to count for. Texas does have more dangerous power across the board, but I do think Gomber has shown run prevention skills in a way that has not been the case for Fultonevich in a while now. And even comparing the XFIPs, like on the year, Gomber 3.9 XFIP compared to a 4.9 for Fultonevich. And I guess that's a question I have for you, Greg. Are you just buying in more on Fultonevich because, well, A, the ownership is a lot lower, but B, because you think Colorado's substantially worse than Texas, or is it just the ownership part?
It's the ownership part. So I totally agree. If we're just, and also actually in my lineups, I have Gomber 18% and Fultonevich 13% right now. But relative to ownership on the field, that puts me at about a third the field on Gomber and 3x the field on Fultonevich. So it's always relative to ownership. And so certainly, like, it's not that I'm 0% Gomber, but I think 36% is crazy. And I think Fultonevich, just relative to these other terrible options on the slate, I don't think Gomber's 7x more likely to be optimal than Fultonevich is. I don't think Jake Odorizzi is 6x more likely to be optimal than Fultonevich. The Rockies are last in MLB and WRC plus against right-handed pitching, and also he's 5,700. So to me, I think getting 3x the field on him and getting like 13, 15%, something like that, I'm fine with that on Fultonevich. And then Austin Gomber, it's just hard for me to trust a mediocre starting pitcher at Coors Field who's in 35% of lineup. So in my player pool, I'm just underweight to him.
It is going to be a warmer day in Colorado as well, just shy of 80 degrees and 30% humidity rate. So the humidity doesn't matter that much, but the weather heating up does mean the ball's going to fly a little bit more. So if you think Austin Gomber, is going to give up those big fly, honestly, I don't even think it matters. Like, I think you need to play some amount of Gomber. To me, I'm more comfortable getting to 30 than to 15, but I still think I would try to come under the overall field projection of 36. But I do think, this is one where you have to play both spots. Really with MLB, for a lot of these spots, you are going to play both spots besides, the Gerrit Coles of the world. And even then we talked about that. We're playing one-offs might not be the worst thing. So I just kind of have to get comfortable with that when you are playing MLB DFS. And I think to me, 30% Gomber. Greg wants to go a little bit less. I think it's going to be up to you guys here with the field being at 36%, how you want to handle that. And I guess on FanDuel, Greg, is Gomber at all consideration on FanDuel for you? I'm going to assume it's going to be a hard no, but I just have to ask.
It's not on the slate. The
that's right.
You're
right.
So,
okay, good.
So it's even more so to say no. I don't even have to offer hot takes about Fultonevich or Austin Gomber on FanDuel.
Like, there's a chance you're Fultonevich on FanDuel. No, you've saved yourself entirely from that conversation. Yeah. I'm proud of you for it. Texas on their end, though, does have that 4.9 implied runs. We've seen some disappointing performances from them in Coors so far, but overall, the spot will be owned like it has been bumping off recently. Price tags have come up a little bit for some of these guys. Adolis Garcia up a little bit, but still not quite Coors price tags. And I get why the ownership will be this high for Texas, but I do think, Greg, you kind of have to come under on really all of these guys, I think, besides maybe Charlie Culberson, who's going to be under 10% owned. And it's weird. Like, why is Culberson the one getting entirely overlooked when he actually also has decent pop? And I think more than Jose Trevino, I guess, who is a catcher. So that's part of it too. But like, he shouldn't be the only guy who's unowned in the stack. I feel like that's just insulting with Charlie Culberson.
Yeah, I tend to think, though, these numbers are going to get moved around when the lineup finally comes out, because we don't have a confirmed lineup for the Texas Rangers yet. And that always makes some of the projections, a little wonky. And I wouldn't even be surprised if the ownership on Gomber comes down when the Rangers lineup comes out, which also might cause me to change some stuff. But yeah, right now, I mean, Adolis Garcia, 24% projected ownership, Kiner Falefa, 18, Nick Solak, 28, Nate Lau, 21. And Joey Gallo at 29. So there's a lot of these guys that are really popular. I don't know. It's hard for me to know what to make of this. And I'm at a little bit of a loss, because why are the Rangers like the most popular offense and Austin Gomber why is he the most popular cheap pitcher at the same time? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
I think, and this might just be me reading the tea leaves a little bit more, but I do think it sort of speaks to people understanding this sounds like I'm going to be poetic, but the duality of MLB DFS, where like really in this sport more than anything, I know we talk about a lot on this show, and it sort of makes it tough sometimes to really take stands as much as we can, but for MLB, like, you have to be prepared for the alternate outcome to also pan out a pretty decent chunk of the time relative to what, success rates look like. And I think maybe this represents that people understand, like, hey, Gomber's a risk. And I think one thing I'm noticing with Gomber too, a 10% walk rate on the year, maybe things could get ugly for him if he does load up the bases and somebody goes off here. But I still think, like, if Gomber keeps the ball down, there's a pathway to him being successful. And then if Gomber doesn't, then there's a real obvious pathway for Texas to be successful, where I like if people are approaching slates like that, I think that's actually the way to do it. So if anything, it gives me more faith in the field, but I guess that's relative to what the field's ownership will actually be. This is sort of our ownership projections are, I think, like kind of an idealized version of how people will approach things. And I don't know if they will approach it the way that we're seeing it.
Yeah. Also, it's still a thing where I'm almost certainly going to be making update. I mean, we're going to have to anyway, right? So I'm going to have to make updates where this is a game that starts in 3 hours. We don't have a lineup yet for Texas. We don't have a lineup yet for Boston either at the same time. So we're going to have to wait to see what happens when the lineup comes out. How does that change the ownership? How does it change? Like, also, maybe there's a chance, like, what if Adolis Garcia is out of the lineup? What if Joey Gallo is out of the lineup? You know, it's a game played in a National League park where there is no DH. That could vastly change who ends up being in the lineup. You know, like Willie Calhoun, is he going to end up playing in the outfield? Is he going to get the day off because he's somebody who typically DHs? It's hard to say, and I have a feeling it's going to ultimately end up changing the ownership projections. But right now, I do slightly prefer Rangers stacks to Austin Gomber as a pitcher, just given how popular Gomber is. I understand the Rangers themselves are also popular, but I like getting a little bit of the leverage off of a really popular pitcher that I think shouldn't be picking up that much ownership.
You have any thoughts on Chris Davis at 2,700 on DK? Like I'm just seeing the price tag now because it didn't import with our projections on us most recent run. And I guess there's a chance he might not be in the lineup, but at 2,700 with the historical pop he's had playing at Coors, he's one guy that to me, I mean, he does project for 31% ownership right now, but a guy that does seem hard to avoid in a way where the ownership being there that heavy makes me feel like you have to avoid him because he's equally likely to have a tough time and strike out. Though strikeout rate only 19% against left-hand pitching since 2019. But Chris Davis, one of those guys that I feel people might not even know is on Texas, and I barely remembered that. And I feel like I just have to mention him here because that is a crazy price tag for a guy who broke slates like two seasons ago.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. First of all, I don't know if the slate already locked. We locked at 12:20 today, so we're working. Right. We're working overtime now. But the other thing too, I don't think Chris Davis is going to be in the lineup because there's no DH, so I'm not too concerned about it.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know. Schmancy Schmaps has him in the 6 hole. So that's why he came up for me. And we haven't projected for ownership right now, but we'll see how it goes. And I forgot the weird timing of the slate. So yeah, we are locked. Hopefully you guys weren't pinning your hopes on me telling you when to get your lineups in, but get your lineups in if you haven't yet. And if you did get your lineups in, hopefully you did, use that promo code MLB live before lock, because that is going to be one that gets you 15% off your first week of all the Awesemo Plus data. Use it at awesemo.com/join. We're gonna have these special promo codes sometimes popping up per show now. So check it out. MLB live before lock is the promo code. And Greg, give the plugs for this surprise end to the show here where it's like a twist ending where nobody saw it coming.
Yeah. Go follow me on Twitter, Ehrenberg DFS. I'm going to be doing NBA live before lock tonight with you. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah, I think, I have the MLB deeper dive coming up and then I got you again. So it's a long day of content. We always sandwich our days here with the morning show and then the evening show.
Yeah, I could tell the way you were talking that you were trying to fill the extra few minutes and you didn't realize that. You didn't realize the slate had already started. So there was a part of me thinking, do I just let him talk for another 10 minutes until he thinks the show's over? I was
intrigued by Chris Davis, honestly. That was genuine intellectual curiosity about him existing again and being on a lineup.
I did the same thing though, because we're so used to the standard, start and lock times and whatnot. And I was updating my lineups before because I was trying to get some extra stuff in with the Rockies. I was tinkering around with some ownership. I was like, oh, the slate starts in like 3 minutes. I need to get this uploaded.
Well, good thing that you knew, Greg, because otherwise I would have kept going for the remaining 7 minutes. But hope you guys enjoyed your 3 minutes of bonus content. We genuinely appreciate you guys being here and appreciate the chat as well today. You guys brought it in chat, and it was a positive chat, which is all I ask for here when I'm a sleepy boy waking up to do these and apparently don't even know the time of the show. But we appreciate you guys very much. Hit the like button before you go. Subscribe to the channel because we have content coming up all day long, including, again, 2.5 hours. I'll be back doing the MLB Deeper Dive with Alex, Awesemo, Baker, and Gundacker talking about the main slate. Check out the main slate ownership projections as well, which are free today. We'll see you guys again very soon. So enjoy your days. Good luck.